Welcome back again to Last Week I Watched. I'm Mark and I watch and review movies and TV to help you decide whether or not they're worth your time. It's been a bit challenging the last week. We've had a bout of COVID in the house and the rest of us have all been masked and pushing food under the door to my daughter. Thankfully she's recovered and we're okay, so that's great. But I hope that you're all still staying safe out there and you're all well, because it's definitely still out there at the moment and it's still going on, and I really don't want anyone to be sick or any more deaths from it, because it's terrible. But anyway, I watched some more movies, and in these trying times, movies and TV are an escape to help cheer you up. So I hope that some of these things might be of interest to you. So this week I want to talk about The Silence, Bird Box, Tok Tok, Spoiled Brats, Space Force, briefly season 1, but in particular season 2, and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So let's talk about them. Okay, so first up was The Silence. It's a film from 2019. It stars Stanley Tucci, Kiernan Shipka, Miranda Otto, and it was showing on Netflix. So when a team of researchers accidentally unleash an unknown species of pterosaur-like creature from a cave system, the world comes under attack from terrifying creatures that hunt by sound. These so-called vesps apparently reproduce at a ludicrous rate and threaten the planet. I wonder where they came up with the name Vesp from. It's strange. Anyway, Hugh, played by Stanley Tucci, and Kelly Andrews, played by Miranda Otto, they escape the city for the countryside with their daughter Allie, played by Kiernan Shipka, who lost her hearing when she was younger, like 3 years previously. Her brother Jude is accompanying, along with sick grandmother who's cancer, and the family dog. Hugh's friend Glenn joins them and brings his guns, because it's America. After encountering massive traffic jams, they head across country, but quickly get into trouble when Glenn rolls his car down an embankment. The noise attracts the vesps to the family, and Glenn sacrifices himself to lure the vesps away. Hugh is then forced to lead the family away through the woods, and they stumble upon a house with a high fence. It's not made of gingerbread. After the owner is killed by vesps, Kelly is bitten, and once they manage to fight them off, they move into the house for cover. They stay there for a while, and Ellie starts to learn about what's happening in the outside world, that religious cults have sprung up in the wake of the disaster. And when they have to go into town for medicine, as Kelly's leg has gotten infected, they attract the attention of the Reverend. This cult later comes after the family, as they want the females and have been cutting out their tongues so they cannot make noise. The family fight against the tongueless cult, and yeah, it goes on from there. The movie is based on a book, and it's a grab bag of interesting ideas, but it just doesn't really gel together into something very compelling. Even for a monster movie, there's no real tension in it, and the vesps don't create much fear even when they show up. They just kind of swarm around and bite like little flying piranhas. In some ways, the most terrible monster in this, though, is still people, and the creepy cult that eventually shows up and wants Ellie for breeding stock and deliberately attempts to attract the vesps in order to decimate the family while they abduct Ellie is way more monstrous than some largely dumb creatures that are just attracted by noise and sort of swarm en masse. But I would have expected the creepy cults to turn up over a span of time, and it feels like this all sort of just happens in a couple of days, and so it just feels sort of weird and kind of unearned. Even the vesps, while they look great as an effect, they don't make a lot of sense. I'm not sure why an underground creature that dwells in darkness would necessarily fly. I know bats do this, but they don't live solely underground, so they do kind of make a little bit more sense. But these things have been sealed underground for millennia, I'm guessing. They've never seen daylight. Why aren't they something more suited for living deep underground in total darkness? Maybe swarms of killer lizards or snakes or something like that. Worms, perhaps. Also, we're told that they threaten the Earth and they're spreading everywhere. Initially, I'm wondering how many were in the cave. The cave shouldn't have been big enough to have so many that they could cover the Earth. But then apparently they reproduce like horny bunnies. How they'd survive underground if they're furiously reproducing, using up all available space, limited food supply, etc., doesn't make sense, unless they're all cannibalizing each other, I guess. But we don't ever really sort of go into any kind of understanding with these creatures, so I guess it doesn't matter. The other thing that doesn't make any sense is their constant assertion that Ellie's deafness is a superpower. How is it a superpower? I mean, yes, she knows sign language, and that's helpful for communicating quietly, and you know, the family can do that. That's great. But you don't have to be deaf to learn that. And surely being deaf is a disadvantage, since you can't hear if anything is making noise, and you can't hear the Vesps. So overall, the movie's it's a bit of a shambles. It's definitely more of a drama than a thriller or a horror. It's really scary. It doesn't really build any great suspense, apart from a couple of sequences, really, you know, with the cult and things like that. It's basically a zombie movie with the zombies replaced with Vesps, but they kind of haven't learned any of the lessons from a good zombie movie and sort of applied them to this. It's all a bit sort of leaden and a bit dull, and it's not a very good survival horror thing, really. It's a real shame because it has a good cast, but there's just not enough here to make much out of it. Quite a lot of criticism was directed at this because it's apparently similar to A Quiet Place, which I haven't seen yet, but I will definitely check it out. Both films were in production at the same time, although The Silence is based on a horror novel that was out earlier. They just happened to get made at the same time. Although it kind of tracks with Hollywood producing similar kinds of films when they've heard that something else is in production. You know, you get a talking fish movie, suddenly you get half a dozen talking fish movies. I can't really comment though on how they compare, but I don't think this one was very good. Maybe check out A Quiet Place instead of this, since everyone seems to be convinced that it's the better film of the two. Okay, next up was Bird Box. It's from 2018. It stars Sandra Bullock, Trevante Rhodes, and John Malkovich, and it's showing on Netflix. 5 years after an unseen presence drives most of humanity to suicide, Mallory, played by Sandra Bullock, and her 2 children make a desperate bid to reach safety by travelling blindfolded down a river to reach sanctuary. Jumping back in time, it shows how everything went wrong when the people that see the presence are either compelled to kill themselves or become servants of the presence and try to force others to look at the presence and kill themselves. Sheltering with a group of strangers that stumble across each other as they try to flee. They take shelter in a home. There's a number of misadventures. The number of people gradually dwindle, and they slowly learn a bit more about the presence, such as the birds become agitated when it's near. So Mallory gets some birds in a cage to act as a warning system, which I guess is where the title comes from. When they let a new stranger into the house called Gary, he seems a bit off, eventually forcing more of the people to look at the presence and suicide. Mallory stops him, but ultimately there are a few people left. She remains in the house with Tom for 5 years, raising the babies until they find out about a hidden sanctuary with other survivors, and they decide to go there. So we then jump back to the beginning and follow her escape down the river. This movie was better than The Silence, but even with a good cast, it squanders its potential on a weak story. The presence is never shown, it's never an actual creature, it's just suggested that it might be that humanity was judged and found wanting, and that demons have been dispatched to cause the end of times. It seems as if each person faces whatever their own personal hell fear is, and is destroyed by it. So there's no effects candy, the film is largely just driven by its drama. Also, it seems to be making some kind of commentary about Mallory not wanting her child, and the whole thing being a kind of journey for her to accept them. She doesn't even bother to name the children until the end, choosing to call them boy and girl. Original, I know. I'm not sure what relevance any of that plot thread, though, has on the apocalypse. The actors do a good job, and most of the tension in the film comes from their interactions in the house and their performances. There's shitty behaviour from survivors who are either arseholes or corrupted by the presence and getting around in the outside world while blind. Although it doesn't seem like the presence is everywhere all at once, so they discover the bird loophole. I'm not sure why they couldn't just pull down a blindfold, and then when the birds get agitated, they'd put it back up again and sort of just manage in between. But it's clever when they have to drive to the supermarket using the car GPS solely, but the river escape itself seems like it would need a whole lot of luck. I just imagine you'd be banging into embankments and everything else. It's certainly one of the tenser scenes in the movie though, but it doesn't happen till near the end of the film. Spoilers, so if you want to watch it, pause now and go watch it. The ending where the sanctuary turns out to be a school for the blind makes sense, but I don't know how anyone who can see is really going to be any safer there. Perhaps they need to blind themselves to survive, and this would have been a horrific possibility, but one that never seems to get addressed. At least the silence had people cutting their tongues out, although I'm pretty sure you can just make noise without a tongue, so maybe severing their vocal cords would have been a better plan. But at any rate, the problem with both of these films is they throw out some interesting ideas, miss some others, and just largely fail to find the real horror in it and sort of develop the ideas that they have. Having said that, Bird Box is better than The Silence, but it's still just a middling drama with some horror elements. It's largely carried by its cast, but let down by its script, and it really could have used some actual effects. You could have created some real horrific tableaus from individuals' perspective to communicate some actual horror, but instead they've just left it to the audience to imagine that they saw something scary, and you've just got nothing really there to base any sort of fear on. I think there's briefly some drawings on a table of various squiggles. But yeah, it's not good enough for a scary film. You've really got to give the audience something to fear, and it doesn't do that. But hey, it's better than Silence, so maybe check it out. Okay, next up was Tok Tok. It's from 2017. It stars Paco Leon, Alexander Jimenez, Rossi De Palma, and it's showing on Netflix. So this is a misadventures of a group of patients with OCD, and they meet at a psychiatrist's office for group therapy. They all think they've got individual appointments, but they all arrive at the same time. They've got various different issues, such as there's a germaphobe, someone with Tourette's, someone with verification OCD, so they're like constantly checking they've locked the door or they've got their keys, an arithmomaniac who's obsessed with numbers and counting, and is probably a bit of a savant, really, if you're honest about it. They're all forced into the same space and left to their own devices when the psychiatrist is delayed and doesn't show up. So they decide on their own that they're there, they might as well work through their issues together and try to solve each person's issues, or at least come up with some ways to manage their problems. Eventually making some progress, they decide to form a group to support each other. It's a nice film, it's fun, it's a Spanish film, so you will need to engage subtitles. I was looking for something a little bit comedic and easy going after a bunch of horror films, and this movie was definitely amusing. I know you shouldn't laugh at these people, but you really can't help yourself. I have known some people with some of these OCD issues, and they can be really quite serious issues. They're extremely difficult to overcome, and even though the group creates friction with each other, they all eventually get some understanding of what they're going through, and they rub the hard edges off each other till they come together as a group. The cast are fun, they look like they're having a good time with their afflictions. There's also a bit of a twist at the end. It's a fun film, it moves along pretty briskly, and it never felt boring. I highly recommend checking it out. Okay, next up was Spoiled Brats. It's another comedy from 2021. This stars Gerard Jugno, Camille Lou, and Artis, and it's showing on Netflix. So this one's about a millionaire. He wants to help his spoilt children be better people, so he tricks them into believing that the family has lost the fortune on which they've been relying. This is a French film, so you'll need subtitles for this. It's another foreign comedy, though. It's fun, although I would say that Tok Tok was perhaps a little bit more fun, and I enjoyed that one more, but this is still a light, no-brain, feel-good comedy. The story is quite simple, but it's a bit cliched. You follow children as they struggle with the real world, and I have to say, when I say children, they're probably in their sort of 20s, perhaps early 30s, but, you know, developed perhaps about as well as small children. You follow as they struggle with the real world. It's something they've never had to deal with coming from a position of privilege. They struggle to get jobs and sort of finding a purpose, but ultimately they prevail. Dad reconnects with the children as they hide out and they renovate his former childhood home. Dad has come from poverty, so he's no stranger to having to work, and he's trying to instill these values, but unfortunately has, I guess, lost the way along the way raising them. Perhaps I think he wasn't that available while he was building his fortune, and so the kids have just, you know, had money and been spoiled and go over there and spend money and be quiet. And that hasn't done them any long-term value. Unexpectedly, when the ruse is revealed, the children aren't happy with Dad, but they come together again to foil a terrible con man who is intent on marrying Stella, one of the children, to get his hand on the family's wealth. He's so slimy and dreadful that you do find yourself rooting for his downfall. Predictably, it does come. There's nothing really unexpected in the film, but that doesn't mean it's bad. It's still a pleasant watch. It's a chill movie with a happy ending, and in these challenging times, it's nice to have something to just chill out to and recharge. Recommend if you're feeling a bit down with the universe right now. Okay, next up was Space Force. It's a TV series. It's from 2020. It stars Steve Carell, John Malkovich, and Jimmy O Yang. It's showing on Netflix. So this is about General Ned, played by Steve Carell. He's just been put in charge of the latest US force, Space Force. And so he's inherited this motley assortment of scientists, military personnel, and with a vague order to put boots on the moon from the president, he has to figure out how to make it all work. This is a workplace comedy based on what is probably one of the stupidest ideas from the Trump presidency. It currently has 2 seasons. Season 1, they're trying to establish Space Force and get troops on the moon against some competition from the Chinese. It's all pretty mockable given the absurdity of the Donald, and there's a number of ludicrously humorous situations that arise from trying to establish a moon base, train troops to fight in an environment they're just not equipped for, dealing with spies and fending off the sabotage of the Chinese, all while having a stupidly small budget. Season 2 sees them return in trouble after the Chinese moon fiasco from last season, and then having to contend with their budget being cut even more and the threat of disbanding Space Force. This is slightly mirroring real life issues where the show didn't perform as well as expected in the first season, and so was given a reduced run for the season. I think it also got moved from LA to Vancouver or something for cheaper production costs. This meant a reduced episode count in second season, so there's only 7 episodes versus 10 in season 1. There also seems to be much less effects work, etc. There's no moon missions in this season. I think there's just a little bit maybe with a satellite and stuff. Season 2 felt like it had started to find its groove. The cast seemed more relaxed into their characters. There are some genuinely funny bits in both seasons, and it's got a great cast. Some of the occasional cameos are fun also, while still poking fun at real world issues. The casual governmental cruelty of cancelling a Mars mission mid-mission and just leaving the astronaut floating out there seems entirely plausible given how often NASA's budget gets cut in favour of whatever the latest flavoured military project that is currently in vogue. I do hope the show gets renewed and gets what it needs to really hit its comedic heights. Unfortunately, this season does noticeably seem to be struggling against its budget, which is ironic with the storyline, and it would be a shame to waste a good comedic cast that probably just needs some time and resources to really get going. There's fun to be had here if they've just given a chance, I think, and we could really use some laughs right now. Check it out, please, and give it some support. Hopefully it'll get a bit more of a run. Okay, finally is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2022. This was another horror film that the system flung at me. I've heard of it before. I think I vaguely remember watching some in the past, so I thought I'd check it out. This one stars Sarah Yarkin, Elsie Fisher, and Mark Burnham, and it's showing on the Netflix. So after nearly 50 years of hiding, Leatherface returns to terrorize a group of young people who want to gentrify the remote Texas town he's been hiding in. The film does what it says on the tin, really. It's Texas. There's a chainsaw massacre again. I do wonder how old Leatherface is by this point, or whether the crazy old lady was raising just more Leatherfaces in town. Seems like he'd be really old by now, especially if we're expected to believe this is the original Leatherface. It also seems to be a continuation since it references the original events and brings back an original survivor. Perhaps it's not best to overthink the story too much on this. There's really not a lot of story here, and what there is fairly easy to pick holes in. I did like that the young people indirectly caused the old lady's death, fighting with her over the deed to her property, which they claimed was theirs, but in reality it was hers. I did like that there was some remorse expressed, not that it really makes much difference to Leatherface, and it's motivation for him gassing the saw up again. The cast do a good job with what they've got, but you really don't find out very much about them. They're largely just young influencers with plans to change the world, and they're hangers-on that accompany them. They're only there to offer limited resistance to Leatherface and to be dispatched in gruesome ways. And there's plenty of gory effects on show. It's scary, it's occasionally hard to watch, which is to be expected, and that's fine, honestly. It's what the film is. Probably the standout scene, I think, is when the influencers are trapped on a party bus and old Leatherface crashes the party. Everyone's desperate to get out, while of course live streaming it from their phones, and there aren't many options, and it quickly turns into an abattoir on wheels. The plot with the returning survivor who's come to finish him off could have been more cathartic though, but she behaves so stupidly and takes so many risks that you're really not that surprised when she doesn't survive. Honestly, if you've been through it once and you're horribly scarred, why the hell would you go back looking for more? And obviously the villain is never going to be permanently killed anyway, and they just leave it open for continuing adventures, with him returning to his homestead at the very end. No doubt to sharpen his saw for the next one. If you're into slasher horrors, then it'll probably scratch that itch. Just don't expect an amazing storyline. It's all about the kills. Check it out if it tickles your fancy. Okay, so those are my suggestions for this week. I hope they're of some interest to you. There's a bit of a mix in there. I'll try to diversify a little bit. I've also got some maybe themed episodes coming up where I'll try and group things of a particular theme together as well, kind of like what I did with the classics one last week. So check out those when they come on. So as related to that, please do click on the like and subscribe button so that I can notify you when the new videos come out. Feel free to leave any comments below as well. If you have any thoughts, have you seen these movies? Have you seen any movies that you'd like to suggest I watch? Please leave them below, or if you just want to talk about them, that's cool too. And somewhere on screen is my Twitter link. I use this while I'm watching movies. If you want to join me and tweet at me about things, or we can talk about a film, that's where you can find me on there. Alright, so thanks for watching. Stay safe out there, everyone, please. I really do wish you all the best and good health, and I'll see you next time for some more movies and TV. Okay, thanks for watching. Bye now.